moment for everybody to log in. We're going to do a little mic check. Dantalion, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me well? And if anyone cannot hear me, post something in the chat box. Just type something, or if you can't hear me, say A-OK. Would love to hear it. I want to welcome you. This is going to be a really, really good webinar, and it's going to be the central part of what's going on with the training that we're going to be doing in the future here. So there's some really central, some key information. Grab a paper and pencil, real important, and we'll be starting here in a couple minutes.
Righty. Just standing by. Can everybody see the graphic I have up there?
That is if you click on Ryan, his image there. There you go.
Yep, everybody can hear it.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. We're going to give a couple more minutes. You guys have any questions about this? I think I will go ahead and type it in there. We'll bring them up as they come along. I do want to let you know that we are going to make an attempt every week, Thursday at this particular time, having a webinar. It's going to be on new material. It's going to be adding to what you've already learned. Each segment is going to have some really wonderful, valuable little gem of information on influence, persuasion, change work, hypnosis, NLP, you name it. So start marking your calendar, 4 p.m. Thursdays. Now we may not. I think we're gonna have another one next week, and Ryan's going to be going on a little vacation. So what's going to happen is the week after that we may not have it, but stay tuned. We'll let you know.
Sounds good.
Okay, we're still off air. We should go ahead and, when you're ready, Ryan, when you're ready.
Okay. We're live.
All right, excellent. Well, this is Dantalion Jones here, and want to welcome you to the Mind Control webinar. Behind with me here is the admin, Ryan Valito, and he's certainly the master of all the things that controlling this technology, and I'm relying on him heavily and deeply appreciative of him. So what we're going to do today is talk about what is called the meta pattern. If you have questions, real important, write them down on the chat. Brian will read them, or I'll read them. And at some point, we're sort of trying to figure out how to make this a free-for-all where everyone could talk. Maybe we'll figure that out. If not today, then sometime in the future, and you can actually ask questions and participate. So let's talk about what the meta pattern is. I think I'll talk about a little bit specifically what it means by meta pattern. Meta is a way of sort of going up one level, so you include a whole bunch of information below it. So for example, meta, a numbers, for example, are at one level. But when you go up to the level of arithmetic includes numbers, but then it includes other things like the processes of addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. You can go up another level and go into mathematics, and there you're covering even more information. You're covering calculus, you're covering trigonometry, you're algebra as well. And so mathematics is meta to arithmetic is meta to numbers. Now, when I say meta patterns, we're talking about language patterns. These are patterns, or at least maybe they're language patterns. They are certainly processes that people go through to change. So if you've studied neurolinguistic programming, NLP, they have a list of what are called change work patterns. They have the list of the swish, the visual squash. They have the change personal history, the fast phobia cure, and a whole bunch more. But John Overdorf, who sort of discovered the meta pattern, realized that every change work pattern has some things in common. And he started to analyze. In fact, it has 4 things in common. So with a little more research, what he realized is that in any example where someone changes from, say, a negative state to a much more resourceful state, in any situation, even if it's a fictional story of, say, Star Wars and Luke Skywalker, they go through this 4-step process. You can find it and understand it. So I'm going to ask you now, get a paper and pencil ready. I want you to write this down. It's very simple, but it's going to be central to everything in the weeks and the months to come that I'm going to be talking to you about. You'll see as I describe other very, very specific patterns, how the meta pattern is sort of the skeleton that holds every pattern together. So that's where we're going to go. We're going to talk about the meta pattern. So as we talk about various patterns, keep in mind we're going to fit them or show how they fit into the meta pattern. Let's start with just describing what the meta pattern is. It takes 4 steps. So the very first step is what's called associating into the problem state. Now, the problem state is pretty common. The problem state is, I'm depressed, I want to feel better. Or the problem state is, I've got a smoking habit, I want to quit. Or the problem state is, every time I go to this particular part of the house, I feel crappy because it reminds me of fill in the blank. So to start off, making the change to a meta pattern, or making the change of a meta pattern, step 1 is to have the person, and this could be yourself, associate into the problem state. And associating into the problem state means feeling the emotional state that contains the problem. I always ask my clients who want to stop smoking to come in craving a cigarette, so that when they're coming in, they know what a cigarette craving is like. They are associated into the problem. So once you do that, and again, you'll find this in every situation, using the example of Star Wars, this was Luke Skywalker, when he found out his family, his uncle and his aunt were killed. The next step, disassociate out of the problem state into a neutral state. Basically, that means simply have yourself or the person you're working with leave the problem state. So in other words, they're not feeling the emotional weight of the problem. Now, there are ways of doing this. Often if you just let talk and conversation on any other topic than the problem, in about 90 seconds, they will be out of the problem state. You can also direct them by asking distracting questions like, do you smell popcorn? Or you could simply have them look around the room and notice certain things and ask them to compare how these things are same or different to other things in the room. It doesn't really matter as long as their attention is taken away from the problem state. So they're no longer in the problem state. So that is step number 2. Now, step number 3 is the resource state. You want them to feel the resource state. When someone comes in with a phobia, it is incredibly easy to get them in the problem state. You just have to have them think about whatever it is they're fearful of. And they'll start to get agitated, feel uncomfortable, not want to talk about it. So you don't have to work very hard. And when you ask them, what do you want? As long as they're in the problem state, what they're going to tell you is, I don't want to feel this. Well, if they're only focusing on what they don't want to feel, they're still in the problem state. You need to get them out of it. Some of the ways that I do that is I ask them, I say, just imagine I can reach in your head and pull out that problem and all the feelings that are associated with it. And we have an opportunity to put any wonderful, positive feeling in there that will help you accomplish what you want. What would that be? Now that sort of shifts their thinking. If they're still associated into the problem state, they will still say, well, I don't want to be anxious. And so I may have to pressure them and say, okay, I can make you feel dread and fear. I can make you feel depression. I can make you feel guilt. And I use all the negative examples that is different from what they don't want to feel at that moment. And they sort of laugh and they begin to realize that, okay, I don't want those either. Let's talk about what I would want. And they'll mention anything. One of the things that sort of is ideal when it works, and it doesn't work all the time, is they begin to realize that what positive feeling, let's say they're talking about smoke, they want to stop smoking, what positive feeling would encourage them to be a non-smoker when they think about a cigarette? Now, sometimes it will happen very easily. Sometimes it will be, well, if I had this incredible sense of accomplishment about being a non-smoker, great. That's a wonderful thing that they could feel, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride, a sense of self-worth, happiness, joy. So you find out what it is they want as the resource state. And you make sure as they talk about it, they access that resource state. So one of the ways of doing that is you just ask them to remember what it's like when you felt that. Remember what it's like when you felt this sense of accomplishment. You've done some things you can feel very proud of. Tell me about those things. And as they talk about them, I'll mention the sense of accomplishment. I mention, in present tense language, how this feels really good when you feel this sense of accomplishment, doesn't it? And they'll nod their head, yes. Okay, so now we've reassociated them into the resource state. That's step number 3. Step number 4 is quite simply, you take it's referred in 2 different ways. I'll talk about it in one of the NLP ways, which is you collapse the resource state with the problem state. Okay, and I'll define that. Basically, you ask the person, or you, if you're trying to change yourself, you ask the person to work at experiencing both of those states simultaneously. Now, they can't do that. It becomes very confusing. One of the techniques in neurolinguistic programming is you set an anchor for the problem state. You set a separate anchor for the resource state, and you always make sure the resource state is so much bigger than the problem state, has much more positive. And then you fire the 2 anchors off at the same time. It's always interesting to do that because you start to see these people sort of, smoke comes out of their ears. They look a little confused. Things are happening. In other words, neural networks are being made that, am I still on? Okay, there we go. You got silent there for a while. Neural networks are being made that weren't there before. You have this one neural network that's just all the problem state, in which as soon as they're in a situation or they think about, say, a project that needs to come up, or they see their friends, or they feel a sense of worry, it's immediately associated to, say, a cigarette. But when you ask them to now bring in the resource state, it forces a change in that neural network of responses. It literally rewires how the person responds. Now, the end result is the resource state gets immediately linked to what used to trigger the problem state. And you can always test this. So I want to just go over it. It is so simple. I do want you to write it down. I do want you to think of whatever types of examples that you could ask about, and let me see how we can make it fit. So I like to use the example of Star Wars, and there are several ways of imagining this, because this can be found in any form of literature where the main character changes. So, okay, well, yes, I'm a Star Wars geek, by the way. Star Wars, Luke Skywalker starts off, his family he's in the problem state. His uncle and his aunt have died. He has nowhere to go. So that is his problem state. So to disassociate him from the problem state, well, what does he do? He goes to, I think it's Dagobah, to find Yoda. And that separates him from the problem state. It also emerges him into the various resources, the stuff about the Force. So he now learns that he has this very powerful resource state. Now, the whole trilogy of Star Wars culminates when Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader get together, and that is literally where the dark side of the Force and the light side of the Force come together. And the result is now Luke is after he vanquishes Luke Skywalker, or after he vanquishes Darth Vader, he now has the resources, and that from this point forward, whenever he's in anything associated with the problem state, he's immediately linked to the resource that he has, the Force. Now, if you want to, think of any sort of story in literature and where the character changes, and you'll find that you can fit this model into that story. It works with every NLP language pattern. And what's wonderful about really sort of taking this very simple meta pattern in is when you start to learn the patterns, the various patterns I'll be teaching over the next weeks, you'll see how they work. And after a while, once they get all ingrained and sort of becomes a part of your understanding of the human psyche, what happens is you can start to get very free-flowing with this. So it's honestly that simple. Now, in hypnosis is a wonderful state to do this type of change work. I do a little bit of pre-talk, or at least interviewing, to find out what the resource state is and to find out what the problem state is, obviously. But with hypnosis is when someone is hypnotized, they are pretty much already dissociated. What you describe to them, they'll experience because you describe it to them. So you talk about the problem state, and you can do that actually in the conscious state. You could do it in hypnosis as well. Then in hypnosis, you bring about the resource state. They're already dissociated, so you talk about the resource state. You make sure you have enough examples from the previous discussions you've had with them to make the resource state prominent and something they can experience. They're experiencing it firsthand. Once they're in there, in that resource state, then have them experience what the problem used to be, and I'm using the past tense, what the problem used to be, the trigger used to be, but now it triggers the resource state. So I think a good example of that would be, I was working with I think he was 12 years old. He had a fear of dogs, and it was causing his entire family trauma. The young fellow could not go to see his brother's soccer matches because he was afraid dogs might be there. he was very eager to change. We did the hypnosis, and I just started talking about laughing. And as he was in hypnosis, he started to imagine himself just laughing hysterically. And he actually started to laugh as I was doing it. Then I had him imagine a picture of him laughing, that as it panned out, he was laughing and all of these dogs were licking his face. And then as it panned out even further, he was laughing, wrestling with the dogs. And then it was like a movie going backwards. I told him, just imagine this, everything going backwards. And now you leap up from the ground as the dogs jump away from you because everything's going backwards. And you're excited. And then they walk back further and further, and you get excited. And now imagine that going forward. You see them running forward toward you. And you start to get excited. And then they leap on you and you're laughing, and then you fall on the ground and you're laughing more and more. It was so quick. He had absolutely no problem with dogs from that point forward. And we went through this very simple model of, and again, this is the fast phobia cure that you'll find in most of the NLP research that you do. It's you disassociate them. They know what the problem state is. Disassociate them out of the problem state into a neutral state. So that was the hypnosis. Then in the hypnosis, I had them associate into a resource state. In this case, it was fun. It was laughter. Certainly a 12-year-old child would understand that. Really got into it. Then as the process continued, we went to step 4, which was the resource state is linked to the trigger. In this case, it was dogs. And now dogs trigger laughter and fun. For any of you who know or use any of the NLP language patterns, just notice how this can fit into it. Let's see. I'm looking at the. Do you see any questions there, Ryan, that we can address here? I see a lot of people posting, which is awesome. I'm not sure. Not all of it are questions we can use.
Sure. We have a question from Pat. Pat asks, can this be applied to self-hypnosis?
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. The hardest part of doing it to yourself, and you can still do it, is disassociating. So you know what the problem state is. And actually an example would work a lot better. So Pat, if you have an example of something you'd like to change, I could walk you through it. But you know what the problem state is. What you can do is to disassociate from the problem state is to ask yourself, what would you rather be feeling than that? In fact, you ask yourself a very critical bunch of questions about what would be the emotional state that would honestly reinforce what you want to accomplish. So not only say if you were a smoker, do you want to have a resource that keeps you from smoking, but you'd want to have a resource that continues to encourage you as a non-smoker. I have one, and I teach it to my clients. I create a great deal of pleasure, of joy, of just really super good feeling, and I link it to the words, I'm a non-smoker. So when they're done with the hypnosis session, I ask them, say these words, I'm a non-smoker. Say those words. And they say it. I say, how does it feel? And it feels good. And I have them repeat it, and I just keep asking them to notice. Feels really good, doesn't it? Say it again. They say it again. Feels even better, doesn't it? So they just keep repeating it, and then finally I say, it feels true, doesn't it? They say yes. At that particular point, that feeling is now linked to those words, I'm a non-smoker. They can use that now. Anytime they might think they would want a cigarette, and I tell them, why wait until you might want a cigarette? Say it when you don't want a cigarette. That reinforces it. So it's a resource that keeps them not just from going back to where they used to go, but a resource that keeps them moving forward in the direction that they want. All right. Want to thank Robert, made the comment. Awesome stuff. Thank you. Any other questions that we can go through here? Ryan, do you see any that we can answer? Let's see. I'm looking at them right now.
I'm scanning the questions as well.
Okay.
If you have questions, you're welcome to post them. We'll be glad to answer.
Is questioning, Rickard's asked, is questioning yourself daily, does it help for growth? Sort of depends on the quality of the questions. By asking questions, and I have a whole CD out called, what's it called? It's called The Filters of Reality. If you ask the right questions, it works wonderful. You have to frame your questions to have a presupposition, a positive presupposition. So if you ask the question, why is life so crappy? What you're going to get is the presupposition that life is crappy. If you ask the question, why is this moment the best moment of my life? You're presupposing it's the best moment of your life, or at least it's a really good one. And if you ask it without rejecting it, you will start to search for an answer. So by directing your questions with a presupposition, like, what's great about today? That's a question I often like to ask. What do I get to do today? In other words, what can I look forward to today? What is awesome about this moment? So I got another question here. A summarized version of the 4 steps while helping a smoker become a non-smoker. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so I'll use the 4 steps. And again, I'm not necessarily going to be using hypnosis. You can help people stop smoking conversationally with this particular model. You can do it with NLP patterns. You can do it with hypnosis. So first of all, the problem state. The problem state is, I'm a smoker. I have cravings. That's the problem state. I want to smoke a cigarette when I don't want to smoke one. So that's the problem state. Disassociate them from the problem state, and I'll usually ask them this question. Step number 2, disassociate from the problem state. I'll ask them, what would you rather feel than a craving? And sometimes they just focus more on they're still in the problem state. They'll say, well, I just don't want to feel a craving, or I don't want to feel the anxiety. And I always remind them, we already know what you don't want to feel. What would you rather feel instead? So that will disassociate them. And then once they land on something, we start talking about the resource state. That's number 3. And talking about it enough so that they start to feel it. This is where you have to use your sensory acuity, your visual awareness, your awareness of human beings to make sure that somewhere inside they're connecting with this resource state. You can use a lot of presuppositions, or you can start talking about that state in the present tense. So when you feel this excitement, for example, when you feel this excitement, you feel really good, yes? And nod your head. And they start to associate into that resource state. Step number 4 is when the solution takes place. And that's when you basically say, or you can say it, or you can just tell them to notice. Notice what it's like now. How from this point forward, anytime you even think of a cigarette, you feel this, and you describe the resource state. Then I have them imagine it, whether they're mildly hypnotized or their eyes are closed or they're deeply in hypnosis. I'll have them imagine seeing what you would see, hearing what you would hear, and feeling this positive feeling the moment you thought of a cigarette. And it just eliminates the desire. Go through every moment of that experience. So now they're in the actual experience of thinking about a cigarette, of feeling all those feelings that would make them never really want to smoke a cigarette. And then going through that whole experience, and I have them repeat this. I'm basically future pacing again and again and again the response that they want. And every time I go through it with them, they're associated into the experience. I ask them to imagine seeing what they would see, hearing what they would hear, and feeling this feeling. After they go through it several times, it gets easier and easier and easier. When the whole process is done, either when they're out of the hypnosis, if it's an official hypnosis session, or we're just back talking after an NLP process, I'll ask them to notice. Notice now. Just think of smoking. Think of trying to want to smoke. And notice how this resource, this name the feeling, whatever it is, just gets stronger and stronger. And they'll nod their head yes, that's what they feel. So that's one of the better ways. That's a good way of synopsizing it. I hope that was Rosemary. I hope that summarizes it sufficiently. Now, Pat asked the question earlier. What can we actively apply? Can we actively apply this process to ourselves to better ourselves? Yes, you can. Would physically changing this is a good one. Would physically changing our place to disassociate to the neutral state be better than simply thinking about it? Yes, because you're changing your physiology. So that's another great way to disassociate. Just move around. One of the things, an interesting story, Richard Bandler was doing some studies with people to see if people could get angry when they are suspended upside down. And he would put them, they would be in this chair that would be a normal chair up against a wall, and they'd be strapped in, and he'd do whatever he'd have to do to get them incredibly pissed off at him. And all of a sudden, when he realized they were pissed off, they'd rotate the chair upside down so their head was down near their floor and their feet were pointing up, and they were of course strapped in. And the physiology changed so significantly that they could not be angry. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that you go upside down to change your mood, but changing your physiology is absolutely a great way to disassociate from the problem state. Okay? And as far as someone asks, using embedded commands, if you know how to use embedded commands, use them. They do not work exclusively from this particular model. They're just a small little tool to direct the subconscious mind. But yes, always use embedded commands. Ryan, now this is your first exposure to this. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about it? You've done hypnosis, you have done some NLP training. What is this model? How does it sound to you?
It's great. You always pull a wealth of information together, and I think this was a well thought out, well put together presentation. Grateful to have this.
Good, thank you. Well, again, I want you to, even though this is just 4 very simple steps, write them down and just go through what you've learned about hypnosis, about NLP, and notice how the change, this meta pattern fits into that structure. If you want to look at any work of literature in which the character goes through a transition, a positive transition, mythologies, any sort of myth is full of this, from the Iliad to the Upanishads to the Bhagavad Gita, you name it. Any sort of mythological, even Jesus's Last Supper has this sort of quality in it where it fits into the meta pattern. One of the things you can do is if, let's see, there is a book and it is called The Meta Pattern. let me see if I can find it. If you go to Amazon and just simply search 3 words, The Meta Pattern, you can get the book. It's available on Kindle as well. You might also, I'm going to just display a link here, at least I think I'm displaying the link, for a resource that I have. It's called Mind Control Library. And Ryan, I'm hoping you're seeing this there. I allegedly displaying the offer, but I don't see it. And what it does is the Mind Control Library basically has all of Amazon's collection of books on hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, influence, persuasion, even interrogation, and a lot of other things that have to do with how the mind works. So I have that link there. It's mindcontrollibrary.com. These are all books that are on Amazon, some of them downloadable, some of them are courses. So go there, and that would allow you to download some of those books and resources. What we're going to be doing here on a weekly basis, with a few exceptions, we're going to be meeting and we're going to be talking about various influence and persuasion patterns. Next week, I am going to reveal to you what's called Jeff Stevens referred to it as the emotional switch. It is one of the coolest conversational patterns I've ever come across, because when it works, it's like you're basically just talking to somebody. And if anyone were just to watch the conversation, they would not know what's going on. But the person you're actually doing the pattern with has this very dramatic change in how they're feeling. They may start off in one mood and tell you they're feeling in this one mood, and they'd rather feel differently. And usually in the course of less than a minute, maybe 2 minutes of just talking, they're in an entirely different state. And they feel as though, they're no longer having a problem. So I'm going to tell you about that. It fits this model of the meta pattern perfectly. It will require a certain amount of linguistic skill and practice, but I can tell you one thing I did is I used this emotional switch. I was teaching it in Italy, and I had a seminar, and there was a translator there, and the examples I were giving was just how to switch someone from one mood to another. And someone raised their hand and said, I was trying to work with this fellow to see if I could help him become a non-smoker. And frankly, I had never thought of using the pattern for changing someone to being a non-smoker. And he asked, can I do that? And I honestly said, I don't know. I've never tried it, but I'd be willing to try to see if I can do it. And so I invited the person up on stage, and we went through this emotional switch process. I sort of adapted it to smoking. And by the end of it, I simply asked him, are you a non-smoker? And he just looked at it and says, yep, I'm a non-smoker. And I asked him after the seminar, yeah, I'm still a non-smoker. So it actually can be used for that. It's not something I think it was designed for, but he was willing to work with me. I got rather creative, and it worked really well. And to my amazement, this was all done through a translator as well. So this is not necessarily a testament of my skill, as it is a testament to the power of this particular pattern when it's done well. So that's what we're going to be covering next week. This recording is going to be made live any moment now, and what I'd like you to do is, when we hang up, it will be able to be recorded, or rather heard as a recording. Go ahead and post it on Facebook. Let them know, people that you know who would be interested in this, that this is a resource that they have, and we're going to bring a lot of people into these webinars, and there's going to be some awesome, some incredible sort of material. So I want to just thank you. Guys, you're here, and because you're here, you're not somewhere else. That's always a good thing. I deeply appreciate you attending, and come back next week. I'll be sending out invitations to the next webinar within the hour, probably. So guys, I want to thank you for showing up because you're here. You're not somewhere else. So you made a sacrifice to be here. I acknowledge the sacrifice you're making, and I know you're doing a great job. Guys, thank you very much. Ryan, admin guy, thank you. You did a great job. And we'll see you guys next week.
Sounds good. We'll see you guys next week.